Thank you so much for joining us at this hour. I'm Daniel Che here to provide you with the latest on this special edition of Arirang News. As we have been doing since Tuesday morning, our newscast this hour is dedicated to the historic presidential election coming on the heels of the nation's first ever impeachment of a democratically elected leader. We've been seeing some early celebration at Seoul's Gwanghwamun Plaza as the Democratic Party of Korea candidate Moon Jae-in has claimed victory and is now set to become the next leader of South Korea. Our Yoon-shin is there. She has been there, soaking up the atmosphere for us. Yoon-shin, emotions must be running high over there still.
Hey, Daniel. So a massive celebration was held here at Gwanghwamun Square just a couple of hours ago, marking the Democratic Party's Moon Jae-in's huge victory in the 19th presidential election. Now, he greeted and thanked thousands of supporters who came out to congratulate his victory in person. And the crowd actually started pouring out to the streets when the exit poll results started forecasting his victory earlier. He then gave a speech to reassure his supporters that he will become the leader that he vowed to be. Now, there's a good reason why he chose Gwanghwamun as the place to celebrate his victory. A series of candlelight vigils was held here in protest of the massive corruption scandal that engulfed former President Park Geun-hye. Hundreds of thousands, sometimes over 1 million Koreans would gather here demanding the swift removal of Park from office. Now, Moon attended numerous rallies himself, declaring his determination to wipe out the deep-rooted evil in society, even before officially running for president. And as a candidate, it is also the place he visited on the first day of the official campaign. And now, as the new leader of South Korea, he once again confirmed his pledge to build a new country at the very place where it all started for him. Back to you, Danielle.
All right, thank you for being out there for us all day, Yoon-shin. Well, Moon Jae-in immediately reached out to the public to express his gratitude for their support. Here's what he had to say.
사랑하는 국민 여러분, 안녕하십니까? 문재인입니다. 고맙습니다. 정말 고맙습니다. 정의로운 나라, 통합의 나라, 원칙과 상식이 통하는 나라다운 나라를 만들기 위해 함께해 주신 위대한 국민들의 위대한 승리입니다. 함께 경쟁했던 후보들께도 감사와 위로를 전합니다. 새로운 대한민국을 위해 그분들과도 함께 손잡고 미래를 위해 같이 전진하겠습니다. 내일부터 저는 국민 모두의 대통령이 되겠습니다. 저를 지지하지 않았던 분들도 섬기는 통합 대통령이 되겠습니다. 존경하는 국민 여러분, 국민들의 간절한 소망과 염원 결코 잊지 않겠습니다. 정의가 바로 서는 나라, 원칙을 지키고 국민이 이기는 나라 꼭 만들겠습니다. 상식이 상식으로 통하는 나라다운 나라 꼭 만들겠습니다. 혼신의 힘을 다해 새로운 나라 꼭 만들겠습니다. 국민만 보고 바른 길로 가겠습니다. 위대한 대한민국, 정의로운 대한민국, 자랑스러운 대한민국, 당당한 대한민국, 그 대한민국의 자랑스러운 대통령이 되겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Although Moon Jae-in has virtually won the election, ballot counting still continues at designated stations all over the nation. Let's go to our Kwon Jang-ho, who is at one of those vote counting stations in Seoul. Jang-ho, how is it going on over there? I believe the volunteers must have slowed down a bit compared to earlier today to Moon's, and also there must be some kind of response to Moon's virtual victory over there as well, right?
Yes, good morning, Daniel. Despite the late hour, the 250 volunteers here at the Yeouido High School are continuing to count each and every ballot diligently. But compared to a couple of hours ago, things have slowed down somewhat. Most of the ballot boxes have now been emptied and they've been stacked away to the side. And I've seen a few sets of volunteers who look like they're getting ready to be dismissed for the day. The current count here at this station, representing the district of Yeongdeung-Pogu in Seoul, is at almost 80%. That's a little higher than the national average, which stands at around 75%, but there are some differences among some of the districts. For example, while Gyeongsang-Bukdo province in the southeast has completed almost 90% of the vote, over in Incheon, the count is still languishing at less than 60. Looking at the actual results themselves, at the current count, Moon Jae-in is leading with almost 40% of the vote, and that's about 14 percentage points higher than Hong Jun-pyo of Liberty Korea Party, who's holding at around 26%. Following behind is An Chol-soo at, quoting his party, a disappointing 21%. And it looks like there won't be much change from these current figures. Now, despite Moon declaring victory, the National Election Commission is yet to make it official, as final results are expected to be announced at around 7 a.m. That's 5 hours from now. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, thank you for those updates there, Chang-woo. We appreciate it. And now let's turn to our Kim Ji-yeon, who is in the studio with the latest figures and voting results. Ji-yeon, there were some huge gaps depending on the region.
Well, let's look at the figures. 75.3% as of 1:50 a.m. Korea time has been counted according to the National Election Commission. And in the capital city of Seoul, we have Moon Jae-in with 41.7% and An Chol-soo falling behind him. And in Gyeonggi-do province, we have Moon Jae-in with 41% support. And in the western port city of Incheon, there's also a 40%, no surprise there. In Gangwon-do province, there's 33.4%. In Gyeongsang-Bukdo province, there's also, Hong Jun-pyo is still in the lead with 51%, but there's no surprise there either because this was considered as a traditionally conservative stronghold. And in Daegu, Hong Jun-pyo is leading with 46.8%. In Gyeongsang-Namdo province, Hong Jun-pyo is also leading in the coastal areas, southern eastern Honam area, which is a stronghold for conservative voters. This is a key place where I want to focus. This in the city of Ulsan, Moon Jae-in is leading with a staggering 36.5%. Comparing it to his rival Hong Jun-pyo, presidential rival, there's more than a 10%, 10% or more gap. And in Busan, 37.7% for Moon Jae-in. Jeollabuk-do province, Moon Jae-in has a staggering 64.5%. Of course, this is from a traditionally liberal stronghold. In Jeollanam-do province, 59.62%. But in this region, it's lower than expected because in the 2012 presidential election, Moon Jae-in had more than 60% support when he was competing with then conservative candidate Park Geun-hye. And in the City of Light, 60% lead with Moon Jae-in. He probably had a lot of boost here because there was a lot of voter turnout in this region. And in the city of Daejeon, there's 43% support for Moon Jae-in, followed by An Chol-soo with 23%. And in Korea's administrative capital, in the city of Sejong, there's 49% lead for Moon Jae-in. You can see that the votes were quite split up between conservative and center-left voters. In Chungcheong-Bukdo province, 37.7% compared to Hong Jun-pyo's 27%. There's quite a 10% gap here, which is very surprising. In Chungcheongnam-do province, there's also 9% gap between the two. And lastly, in the Jeju Island, there's 44.3% for Moon Jae-in, followed by An Chol-soo.
Right. What's interesting is that for the trailing two candidates, similar single-digit figures in most parts, but for the three, I'm sure they were grinning from ear to ear and then shuddering at the sight of certain numbers. The gaps are huge depending on the different regions.
And the gap is widening by the hour because when we were first making these election results as of like 8 p.m. or 10 p.m., the gap between Hong Jun-pyo and Moon Jae-in were not that big, but now it's quite clear that Moon Jae-in is having a landslide victory.
Right now, I guess the Moon camp can kick back and relax a little bit. Thank you for constantly keeping us updated on the numbers there, Jian.
No problem.
And now for a deeper analysis of the result of the historic presidential election and the road ahead for Moon Jae-in, we have Professor James Kim with us in the studio. Thank you so much for making time for us at this very difficult and demanding hour.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's always great to have a great company. So it's not a problem at all.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, first question I have for you is that Moon Jae-in, of course, will be under greater scrutiny and more vulnerable than ever to various types of attacks now that the previous administration has been very much scrutinized and criticized and earned the distrust of the public. Could these factors force him to be somewhat of a lame duck?
I think he's got two challenges here. Even though the gap and the margins are near about 10%, very similar to what we saw in the exit poll results that came out a lot earlier yesterday in the evening, about 4 or 5 hours ago, where we saw about 17-point difference between Hong and Mr. Moon. Even with that gap, he's still under 50% in terms of voter support. So there's still lingering questions about the legitimacy that he carries and whether he has the voters' mandate to push through the kinds of policies that he wants to push through. The first challenge there in being able to establish his position and saying that he's got the voters' mandate to push through the reforms that he needs. The second challenge he has is on the domestic politics front, and it's institutional. The National Assembly that he will be working with in order to implement these reforms are largely the same National Assembly that President Park has had to work with, where she was unsuccessful in getting the necessary reforms through that she needed. This is from the last general election. Now, we know that the advancement law requires more than 180 votes. That's 3/5 of the National Assembly. There are currently no party or coalition or party that I could foresee that makes up that number. So all these reforms about the economy, chaebol reforms, political reforms on changing the political system to make it cleaner, these require some degree of consensus in the National Assembly, where I just don't see how Mr. Moon is going to get that in the next 4 years, or 3 years at least, until the next general election in 2020.
Also, this was a snap election, so everything was rushed, and a lot of new enemies or new friends were made quite quickly. So it will take some time for things to stabilize in terms of relationships and knowing who to lean on. Next question, James, is that we have roughly 2 months transition period, a transition committee, but this time it doesn't apply. So will it work for or against Moon Jae-in's administration?
I personally think that that transition period doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. If anything, it actually adds a lot of confusion about the next administration's policies, because a lot of rumors float around about who the potential minister is going to be or the prime minister is going to be. And these supposedly are sending important signals about the next administration's policies. And it really creates a very, not a clear political atmosphere. And it adds to the confusion about the next administration's policy. And so, in my opinion, it's actually better that we skip that step and move straight into the appointment process so that there's clarity on the intent for the next administration.
An interesting analogy I heard from another political analyst is it's like popping a can of beer and then waiting for the fizz to run off. So it's better to, drink it once it's done.
Right. I've heard this analogy as well, and I think that's a good point. And good,
well, let's keep our fingers
analogy.
crossed that that's the way it would be. The last question before I let you go, James, it's a similar celebratory tone for the Korean public, like when the Nomuyon administration had a victory. But the difference, it seems, that we have a lot more work to be done here. It's not just a place where we've elected our president, now let's sit back and relax. It's more like the people made this transition possible with the Moon Jae-in administration, and they need to be with the administration throughout. Do you see a lot of responsibilities and burden on the Korean public from here on.
I believe so. I think the voters are completely enfranchised about this election. This election is a win for the public, but the outcome of what comes about as a result of this election is another matter. And I think that's something that we need to wait and see how things turn out in the coming years.
Right, so far so good. And of course, we talked about constitutional amendment, but it's the constitution we've had that enable the public and the Moon administration or Moon Jae-in's camp to get to this point. So it will also be interesting to see how they work towards amendment or perhaps a different type of interpretation of the existing constitution from here on.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. It's an interesting idea. Every administration has toyed with this idea, but they've not succeeded in implementing these reforms. So again, huge challenges on the domestic front with the assembly being split as it is. How is he going to overcome that challenge? It's something that we're going to just have to wait and see.
Something to look forward to, and I don't think we can sink any further than the previous administration.
Right.
Thank you so much for your time, James.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, his victory of the 2017 presidential election is confirmed. Already, some of his qualities visibly set him apart from most politicians: humility over self-promotion, listening instead of screaming back during arguments. Our Hwang Ho-jun helped us get better acquainted with Moon Jae-in, the man who will take the steering wheel of Korea for the next 5 years.
A best-selling author, human rights lawyer, a leader of the opposition party, and now the newly elected president. The 64-year-old politician has held many titles through the years, but they haven't always been in politics. Moon Jae-in was born in 1953 in Geoje, Gyeongsangnam-do Province, an island just off the coast of Busan, the eldest son of a refugee from North Korea. In the 70s, he was arrested and later expelled from college for organizing a protest against the authoritarian Park Chung-hee administration. While performing his mandatory military service, assigned to the Special Forces, he was part of the response team to the 1976 axe murder incident in the demilitarized zone. After the military, he became a human rights lawyer, which is where he met and befriended the late Roh Moo-hyun, who went on to become Korea's 9th president. Moon served as Roh's campaign manager and then as his presidential chief of staff. In 2012, Moon entered politics by winning a seat in the National Assembly representing Busan's Sasan-gu district as a member of the Democratic United Party. He was later nominated as the party's candidate in the 2012 presidential election, but lost to Park Geun-hye. He then became the leader of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 2015. That ultimately prompted the departure of rival An Chol-soo and the party to change its name to the Democratic Party of Korea, as it is known today. Starting Wednesday, Moon takes on a new role which he won on his second try, President of the Republic of Korea. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
I hope the new administration listens to the concerns of all citizens, regardless of their social status, to determine the best way to lead the nation.
I hope that Korea becomes a nation where college students can have the freedom to be more confident and express their opinions openly.
College tuition is too expensive. It would be great if the new administration could create more policies that expand scholarships that help students pay for their education.
I hope that the new president can create a fair society where everyone has equal opportunities.
I want a president who will fight for us average citizens. Also, I hope that the next president will be wise and someone our children can be proud of.
We are all struggling right now. For example, I wake up every day at 6 a.m. and work until 9 p.m., barely making enough to get by. I hope the next president will do something to save us from these difficult times.
This is not the time to talk about the differences between political parties. Now is the time to focus on unity, not on division, for that is the only way we'll be able to grow as a nation.
I hope that the new president does not hurt the people. Even though things might not get the way the president envisions, what is important is that he or she makes the effort to make things happen.
My wish is that the leader has a big heart and does not take sides so that everyone can live happily.
The country is split. There needs to be interaction with the people. I would like a president who can do that while solving the North's nuclear problem.
Since the economy isn't doing so well, I hope a lot of efforts are made for young and unemployed people.
I'm hoping that the entire political system is reformed in a transparent way where politics will exist for the people.
I long for a country that's fair to even those without power. I long for a country where power is not centralized, a country where powerless people can also live happily.
The new president's first day after the election is closely watched by many as it gives people an idea of what they prioritize and possibly seek to achieve throughout their terms. For some perspective on the possible next steps by Korea's 19th president, our Lee Ji-won takes a look back at some of the former president's first days.
Three former Korean presidents, Park Geun-hye, Lee Myung-bak, and the late Roh Moo-hyun, had similar schedules after they were elected in 2012, 2008, and 2002, respectively. They all visited the National Cemetery first to pay their respects to the country's late presidents and fallen heroes. They then met with reporters to deliver their election victory speeches and share their respective governing philosophies in order to address their first message to the people. The three former leaders all had lunch with their election committees and met with a corresponding U.S. head of mission. But there were also differences in their schedules. The two conservative former presidents, Park and Lee, held additional events aimed at paving their foreign policies in a smooth way. Park met with the Chinese, Japanese, and Russian ambassadors, while Lee not only met with the Japanese ambassador, but also had a phone call with the then U.S. president. On the other hand, the late former President Roh Moo-hyun of the Liberal Party focused on getting ready for a smooth transition into the office, which included meeting with a security team and having dinner with correspondents of the presidential office of Cheongwade. Considering the previous cases, the winner of this early election is also expected to visit first the National Cemetery and then meet with reporters on Wednesday morning, followed by schedules reflecting the president-elect's priorities. But the president-elect will also face an unprecedented schedule as he or she will be inaugurated as Korea's 19th president without going through the mandatory 60-day transition period after the election. Instead, the next president will take office the moment the chairperson of the National Election Commission strikes the gavel on Wednesday, confirming his or her win. As such, the 19th inauguration ceremony is expected to be small in scale, with an official ceremony to be scheduled afterward. And amid the country's ongoing instability, many candidates have said they will immediately start working to normalize state affairs. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
South Korea's new administration has a packed foreign affairs agenda to deal with. The most urgent issue seems to be reaffirming the Seoul-Washington alliance. Connie Kim has an analysis.
South Korea's new administration has a sheer number of tasks ahead, including a packed foreign affairs agenda, especially in setting the tone with its main ally, the United States. Amid South Korea's political crisis and North Korea topping Washington's foreign policy, U.S. President Donald Trump already had summits with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Chinese President Xi Jinping at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida to discuss Pyongyang's nuclear threat. This has led to much criticism among experts that Seoul has been left out from the Trump administration's North Korea policy. As such, experts say there is an urgent need for the new South Korean leader and Trump to meet and share how the two allies plan to deal with Pyongyang together.
The most important thing to establish the personal relation with Donald Trump, because actually even in the United States, the main posts have not been completed yet. So it is very important to establish communication level between the two presidents and also at the White House and the Blue House.
If a Seoul-Washington summit is not scheduled soon, the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. are most likely to meet for the first time at the G20 summit in Germany in July. But a first meeting between Seoul and Washington taking place at a multilateral stage has been unprecedented, leading to concerns that such first bilateral meeting should take place as early as next month.
I think it usually took for about 3 or 4 months for a new government to have a summit meeting with the United States. The question is, are we really ready for the summit meeting? Are we ready for a new definition of the alliance? Are we ready for a new lineup of security and foreign policy?
South Korean officials from Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry say that reaffirming the strong South Korea-U.S. alliance will also serve as a stepping stone in smoothing ties with other regional countries, namely China over its opposition to THAAD and Japan's continuous distortion of history and unfounded territorial claims. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
That concludes another special edition of Arirang News. This election has been unique in many ways. More than anything, this wasn't about credentials, rather character. Voters look beyond the policies and promises and vouch for a humble candidate who doesn't toot his own horns, that's willing to listen to the people. Simply assuming our job as South Korean citizens is done to sit back expecting nothing but the best from the new president would be very wrong. It's everyone's responsibility now to ensure we won't have to reach for the reset button ever again. This has been Daniel Che. Thank you for watching.